If you turned on your television any evening between 1965 and 1971, chances are you would have seen a face so familiar it felt permanent. Bob Crane, handsome, quick with a joke, easy to root for, played the kind of hero America liked to keep close. As Colonel Hogan in Hogan's Heroes, he made danger feel manageable. Calm eyes, sharp timing, and a grin that suggested he already knew the exit. Millions watched. The smile read as safe. In June of 1978, Crane was found dead in an apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had been attacked in bed, hit hard in the head, and strangled with an electrical cord. Bloodstains marked the room. The scene was violent and intimate, and detectives noticed what was missing. No obvious sign that a stranger forced his way inside. As detectives rebuilt his final days, the case ran straight into a hidden archive. Private recordings, private photographs, and the early home video setup tied to the one companion who stayed close to him on the road. The murder has never been solved. One man was charged years later, tried and found not guilty. Decades after that, new DNA testing produced an unknown male profile and no courtroom-level answer. The case still sits in a strange place, alive in memory, stalled in proof. This is the story of America's favorite colonel, the hidden life that grew beside the fame, and a killing that exposed how thin a public image can be when the private world is built on secrets. Robert Edward Crane was born in Waterbury, Connecticut in 1928. People who knew him early remembered two traits that stayed with him. He liked to perform, and he liked to be liked. Music came first. He played drums seriously, the kind of serious that makes timing feel like a craft and not a hobby. It taught him how to hold a beat, how to build suspense, and how to land a punchline with precision, even when no one calls it a punchline. Radio became his runway. In the post-war years, radio still glued homes together. It filled kitchens, cars, and offices. Crane learned how to sound present through a speaker, how to build intimacy without being intrusive. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, he was a recognizable voice in Los Angeles on CBS KNX, hosting a morning program that drew a loyal audience. He interviewed major celebrities and handled the conversations with quick warmth, never letting the energy sag. Off the air, colleagues noted he worked hard at being prepared, keeping notes, learning names, and treating staff like equals. That habit traveled with him. Crane married early and built a family while his career rose. That early family life helped lock in the public image. A working entertainer who still read as a suburban father, the kind of face advertisers trusted. In a time when television sold comfort as much as comedy, Crane fit the packaging. Radio work put him near television people, and television was hungry for men who could deliver dialogue like they were thinking it up. He landed guest roles on hit shows, including The Dick Van Dyke Show and The Donna Reed Show. Carl Reiner, after appearing on Crane's radio program, helped open that door by bringing him in for a TV part. Crane came into Hollywood without the tortured mystery packaging. He showed up as a friendly professional who could hit marks, keep the set light, and make dialogue sound natural. Then came 1965. CBS made him the lead of Hogan's Heroes, a comedy set in a German prisoner of war camp during World War II. The premise sounded risky. Some viewers felt a wartime setting should never be used for laughs. The show survived because it treated the Nazis as fools and the prisoners as clever men fighting back with trickery. Crane's Colonel Hogan ran sabotage and espionage under the noses of his captors, and Crane played him as capable, without swagger. The character's confidence made the absurd situations feel playful instead of cruel, and it let the audience relax into the fantasy that smart people could outwit power. The show ran 6 seasons and produced 168 episodes. It made Crane a household name. In later interviews, co-star Robert Clary described him as charming and genuinely friendly on set. Clary had survived Nazi camps in real life and still spoke about Crane with affection, which mattered because it undercut the idea that the production was simply cynical. Crane's daughter remembered him as a present father at home, engaged, ordinary in the ways that count when a child is building their sense of safety. Profiles from the era framed him as an ideal leading man, clean-cut, likable, familiar, the kind of face that could headline a sitcom without making anyone nervous. That image did real work for him. It kept audiences comfortable with a strange setting and kept the network confident it could sell the show. Later, it also made the private details hit harder, because fans had been sold a simpler version of the man. The private life surfaced in uneven bursts after his death, as investigators and family members pieced together what he'd kept tucked away. Crane pursued women constantly, and he documented his encounters. Photographs, negatives, films, later videotapes. The collection grew large enough that people close to him gave it a name. After his death, family members described a dressing room and travel bags that had become storage for explicit photos and recordings shared within a small circle. It changed the investigation because it created stakes beyond grief. More people had a reason to fear exposure, and the material itself, photos, negatives, tapes, was something that could be taken, hidden, or used as leverage. A private life that exists only in memory stays private. A private life recorded on film becomes an object, and objects travel. The era changed the stakes. Today, almost anyone can record a private moment with a phone. In the late 1960s and 1970s, making a recording required equipment, planning, and someone who knew what they were doing. It turned secrecy into a project. The fact that Crane kept building that project suggests the obsession had structure. It grew beyond a single affair into a routine that followed him from studio lots to hotel rooms to dinner theater apartments. Family accounts said Crane sometimes showed explicit photos to acquaintances on sets, a habit that widened the risk of exposure. That kind of behavior moves you from guy with secrets to guy who keeps daring the secret to become public. In Hollywood, word travels faster than contracts. Once stories started circulating, Crane's reputation shifted from safe lead to risk. He still worked, but the center of the industry drifted away from him. Crane also remarried during the Hogan's Heroes era. Actress Sigrid Valdis, Patricia Olson, played Hogan's secretary on the show and later became Crane's wife. By the time Crane reached Scottsdale years later, that marriage was strained, and he was talking about divorce. That instability shaped who had financial and emotional stakes in his next move. After Crane's death, friends and investigators noted that a photo album was missing from his apartment. No one has been able to prove who took it. No one has been able to prove what was inside beyond the general pattern Crane had already established. But the disappearance itself is telling. Even in the first hours, someone understood there were items connected to Crane's sexual life that could change reputations and careers. Crane's secret life became easier to sustain when he met John Henry Carpenter. Richard Dawson, Crane's Hogan's Heroes co-star, introduced them. Carpenter sold video equipment. At the time, portable recording gear rarely sat in ordinary homes. A camera that could be carried into a hotel room and used without a crew was still unusual. Carpenter had access to it and knew how to run it. Crane had the fame, the social reach, and the appetite to use it. Together, they built a routine: meet women, bring them into private spaces, and record the encounters. Crane introduced Carpenter as a manager or business associate. Carpenter handled the equipment and the logistics that made the whole process smoother. When technology failed, Carpenter could fix it. When they needed new gear, Carpenter could get it. The relationship ran on function first. Crane brought access and attention, and Carpenter brought the equipment and the know-how that made the whole routine possible. Over time, Carpenter became a constant presence in Crane's life. He traveled with him. He stayed close during late nights and long stretches on the road. To outsiders, it could look like an odd pairing, but not necessarily alarming. A former TV star and a tech salesman moving through the same bars, the same clubs, the same hotel corridors. The bond was built on shared secrets. The tapes were not just souvenirs. They were evidence that could embarrass or ruin both men. That kind of connection can feel like loyalty, and it can also feel like a trap. Once you know too much about someone, leaving becomes complicated. Crane's family later said he wanted distance from Carpenter. In the final stretch, he talked about making changes and clearing space around him. By the time Scottsdale came into view, the idea of cutting ties was already on his mind. Hogan's Heroes ended in 1971. For Crane, the end of the series never turned into another long run at the center of television. The offers that followed were smaller. Guest appearances, one-off parts, work that kept his face in circulation without restoring his status. The shift was sharper than many fans realized. After the series ended, Crane chased a second hit and never found one. Guest spots and TV movies kept him working, and he tried to sell new projects, but the industry tends to file you under the last thing it loved you for. He could walk into a room and see people light up with recognition, then watch the same people move on once they remembered it was recognition for Colonel Hogan, not for a new role. Dinner theater gave him steady lead work and a room you could feel react in real time. Fewer gatekeepers, fewer executives, fewer casting offices treating him like yesterday's headline. It also meant long stretches away from home in cities where his history felt distant, until it caught up again. By the mid-1970s, dinner theater had become his main lane. It kept him working, but it also kept him on the road, living out of temporary apartments and hotel rooms between shows. The audiences still knew the face, yet the industry attention stayed elsewhere. That kind of life can make nights feel long and routines easier to slip into. Crane's private life kept moving alongside the career decline. In some accounts, it intensified, as if the attention he couldn't get professionally was being replaced by attention he could still get in bars and clubs. Carpenter stayed close through that, period, timing trips to overlap with Crane's touring schedule. Crane talked about reinvention. 2 days before his death, he called his eldest son and spoke about divorce and cleaning up his life. The idea was a reset. Fewer people around him who fed the obsession, fewer situations that could blow up in his face. When someone announces a reset, it forces the people in their orbit to decide where they stand. In 1978, Crane was performing in a play called Beginner's Luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater in Scottsdale, and he had invested himself in making it a recurring piece of work he could carry to different venues. He lived nearby at the Winfield Place Apartments. He was weeks from turning 50. The show gave him a local routine: rehearsals, performances, drinks after, and the private hours when the rest of the cast went home. The setting adds to the unease. Scottsdale was quiet, upscale, and hot, an unlikely backdrop for a famous actor to be killed in his bed, which is part of why the case never stopped bothering people. On June 29, 1978, Crane failed to show up for a lunch meeting. A dinner theater actress who had arranged to meet him, Victoria Berry, went to his apartment and entered. Inside, she found his body. Crane was on his bed, struck in the head and strangled with an electrical cord. The injuries were severe, and people who saw him that day spoke later about how hard it was to process what they were looking at. Police arrived and treated the scene as a personal attack. There was no clear sign of forced entry, and nothing obvious suggested a robbery. The violence was focused, not chaotic, and it happened where Crane slept. Detective Barry Vassall was called to the apartment that day. Later accounts describe how quickly the scene became crowded. People connected to Crane arrived, and the room became a collision point between grief, curiosity, and an investigation that needed quiet discipline. Robert Crane later wrote that he and others walked through the apartment and handled items, adding their own fingerprints and traces. Vassall later disputed that the scene was hopelessly compromised. The disagreement tells you something important about this case. Early hours like this can bend an investigation for decades, and once that happens, later science doesn't always straighten it out. Detectives started with the basics. Who saw him last? Who had reason to be inside his apartment? Who knew his schedule? Who had followed him city to city for years? And who had a reason to fear what Crane might do next? John Henry Carpenter had been in Scottsdale during the same period. He had traveled to see Crane, as he had done many times in the past. After Crane's body was discovered, Carpenter turned in a rental car, a Chrysler Cordoba, and flew back to Southern California. Detectives examined the rental car and found a blood stain on the passenger side door area. Testing showed the blood matched Crane's blood type, and investigators said no other person known to have handled that car shared that type. Carpenter's fingerprints were the only identifiable prints found on that portion of the door. Investigators also described finding blood traces around the apartment, including areas near the door and curtains. Blood was present. What investigators lacked was a way to tie it to one person with courtroom certainty. Blood typing could tell you a category. It could not tell you a person. That gap between suspicion and proof became the case's pattern. Detectives could draw a tight circle, yet the center stayed empty where certainty should sit. That limitation shaped everything. Blood type narrows a field. It never names a single person. In 1978, DNA testing was not available and the murder weapon was missing. Investigators believed the weapon was a camera tripod. Crane owned camera equipment consistent with that theory, and one tripod could not be found after the murder. But a missing object can only suggest. It can't prove. There was also the question of motive, and the motive landscape was messy. Crane's sexual life created a wide circle of people who might have had personal anger, jealousy, or fear of exposure. Detectives had to consider retaliation from a husband, a boyfriend, or someone who believed they had been humiliated or recorded. That line of thinking is uncomfortable, but it fits the reality of the evidence. Crane's private habits widened the map of risk. Even with that wide map, the investigation kept circling back to Carpenter. He was the known companion. He was tied to the recording equipment. He was in Scottsdale at the right time. His rental car held blood consistent with Crane's type in a place where only his fingerprints were found. Prosecutors still faced a wall. They could not place the murder weapon in Carpenter's hands, and they could not use biological evidence to lock the blood to Crane with the certainty juries expect. The county attorney declined to file charges. The case went dormant without ever becoming a courtroom fight. For detectives, the early case became an exercise in frustration. They believed they knew the direction of the truth, but they also knew what a defense attorney could do to a theory built on absence. Without the weapon, without DNA, and without a witness who could place Carpenter in the apartment at the critical hours, the case stayed in the category investigators dread most, a strong suspicion that could not be turned into a clean charge. In 1990, Maricopa County Attorney Richard Romley's office revived the case. A cold case team reviewed the original evidence and the crime scene photographs, looking for anything the first investigation missed. A detective found a previously overlooked photo from the rental car that appeared to show a small speck of tissue on the passenger side. The actual tissue sample was no longer available. The photograph became the evidence, and that fact alone shows how much time had already damaged the case. Experts compared tissue taken from Crane's pillow to that photo and concluded the materials were consistent with being produced by the same fatal blows. A medical examiner supported the tripod theory, saying the wounds matched blows from a camera tripod. With that, prosecutors filed a murder charge. Carpenter was arrested in 1992. Romley framed the arrest as proof that old cases can move again when a new detail changes the equation, even if the new detail is imperfect. The trial began in 1994. The prosecution built its story around access and rupture. Carpenter had been close enough to be inside Crane's apartment without raising alarm. Crane had discussed cutting him loose. The state argued Carpenter had a lot to lose if Crane ended the relationship, access to Crane's social world and a shared secret life that depended on Crane's fame. The state leaned on the blood evidence, the missing tripod, and the photo that appeared to show tissue inside. The rental car. The defense kept returning to gaps. The weapon was missing. The tissue was a photograph. The blood could not be matched to Crane with DNA certainty. The defense argued the state was asking jurors to turn suspicion into proof, and it argued there were other possible suspects given Crane's behavior. the jury acquitted Carpenter. On November 1, 1994, the jury returned its verdict after a short deliberation, leaving the case legally frozen for decades, even as suspicion stayed alive. A juror later summarized the decision in blunt terms. The case did not reach proof beyond reasonable doubt. The verdict ended the only criminal trial that would ever happen for Bob Crane's murder. Under the law, Carpenter could never be tried again, even if later testing produced clearer evidence. Romley later said he wished the state had more than a photograph of tissue, because physical evidence can be tested, retested, and defended in a way images cannot. That legal finality is one reason the case remains so unsettled in the public mind. The verdict closed the courtroom chapter, while the human question kept grinding on. Carpenter died a few years later. By then, the legal route was already closed, and the case was left to the public to argue over. Crane's death shifted the damage into new forms. He received a public farewell in Los Angeles, with castmates and friends attending the funeral. For a moment, the story looked like a classic Hollywood tragedy. A famous man, a brutal death, mourners in dark suits, cameras outside a church. But mourning did not bring clarity. It brought more questions. After the murder, Crane's family fractured. His widow, Patricia Olson, moved his remains from the cemetery where he was first buried to another location without telling his children from his first marriage. The move deepened the split inside the family and kept the story alive for reasons that had nothing to do with justice. The story never stopped resurfacing. Books, documentaries, and dramatizations kept pulling it back into the public eye, and every return carried the same tension: a clear suspect in the narrative and a verdict that never settled what people felt. In 2002, the story reached a new wave of viewers through the film Autofocus, which dramatized Crane's rise, his obsession, and the investigation. It never claimed to be a court record or evidence, but it turned the case into a permanent piece of pop culture. That visibility kept the pressure on officials to recheck the evidence whenever a new tool became available. Years later, Robert Crane wrote that the family had no closure. He meant it literally. An unsolved murder attached to a famous name stays loud. It drags on in public, and it drags on in private. People assume fame brings answers. Sometimes it brings noise, and that noise becomes part of the punishment. In 2016, a Phoenix reporter persuaded the county attorney's office to allow new DNA testing on preserved blood evidence by an independent forensic laboratory. The testing found the presence of an unidentified male profile. The rest of the results were inconclusive. The profile did not bring a name that prosecutors could put in front of a judge, and it did not match Carpenter. It left the case in a new kind of uncertainty, evidence that exists, but points nowhere. DNA can tell you a lot, but it can't always tell you the story you want. The sample was old, and the chain of custody stretched back to 1978, with evidence handled by many people. If a profile comes from a mixture or from material transferred during scene work, it can exist in a file without proving who swung the weapon. That is what the county attorney's office said. The result did not close the case. No one has been held legally responsible for Bob Crane's murder. Investigators circled one man early. The state took its shot in court years later, and the verdict closed that door for good. Later, DNA work added a new unknown, not a name. The files keep growing, but the core problem stays the same. The night is quiet, the evidence is old, and every lead runs into the limits of what can be shown in court today. What's left is a life that split in half and a death that forced the halves into the open. The public saw Colonel Hogan. The police saw the drawers and the tapes. The people closest to Crane saw a man who could be warm in one room and reckless in another. The Scottsdale apartment still exists in photographs. A bed, a cord, a wall marked with blood. A famous face reduced to evidence tags and file numbers. In the end, the case became a story about what could not be proven. Technology arrived late, key evidence was missing, and the remaining facts never locked into something a jury could treat as certain. And that is why the question still hangs in the air decades later, with no clean answer to replace it.